Why Courage? The Cowardly Dog has aged so well. Back in 1999, television was packed with bright colors, goofy jokes, and heroes who always seemed ready for adventure. Then one cartoon arrived that felt completely different. A frightened pink dog lived in the middle of nowhere with an elderly couple. That was it. No superhero powers, no magical destiny, just fear. And somehow, that made Courage the Cowardly Dog unforgettable. What made the show special wasn't simply that it was scary. Plenty of cartoons tried spooky stories. Courage made fear feel personal. Every episode dropped viewers into bizarre situations where giant monsters, haunted spirits, aliens, demons, and mysterious strangers appeared without warning. But the real story was never about the monsters. It was about a tiny dog facing things that terrified him. Every single time. That's why the show still connects with audiences decades later. The creators understood something timeless. Courage wasn't brave because he felt fearless. He was brave because he acted while terrified. The show's most powerful message was hidden behind all the screaming and chaos. Real courage means being scared and moving forward anyway. The animation also helped the series age remarkably well. While many cartoons from the late 1990s followed similar visual styles, Courage mixed traditional animation with strange digital effects, distorted photographs, surreal backgrounds, and unsettling character designs. Some villains looked like they came from a nightmare rather than a children's cartoon. Characters like King Ramses became legendary because they felt genuinely disturbing. The infamous warning to "return the slab" is still quoted today, because it created a level of tension most kids' shows never attempted. And yet, despite all the horror, the series always had heart. At the center was Muriel, the kind grandmother figure who represented comfort and safety. Eustace was grumpy and selfish, often making Courage's life miserable. Together, they created a family dynamic that felt oddly real beneath all the supernatural madness. The emotional depth became even clearer in later episodes. One of the most celebrated stories revealed Courage's tragic past. As a puppy, he was separated from his parents after they were launched into space by a cruel veterinarian. Suddenly, the audience understood why this little dog feared losing the people he loved. His fear wasn't random. It came from loss. That emotional foundation transformed the entire series. Another reason the show has aged so well is that it never talked down to its audience. It trusted children to handle complex emotions: loneliness, anxiety, grief, uncertainty, themes many adults still struggle with today. Instead of pretending the world was simple, Courage showed that strange and frightening things exist. But it also showed that kindness, loyalty, and determination can overcome them. Modern viewers often discover the series again and realize something surprising. The show feels even better as an adult. The jokes land differently. The themes become clearer. The emotional storytelling becomes more powerful. What once looked like a creepy cartoon turns out to be a thoughtful story about fear and resilience. Behind the screams, the monsters, and the bizarre adventures was a simple message that never gets old. You don't have to be fearless to be a hero. You just have to keep going. And that's exactly what Courage did. Again and again. Which is why, decades after it first aired, Courage the Cowardly Dog still feels as strange, memorable, emotional, and relevant as ever. It wasn't just a horror cartoon for kids. It was a story about facing the unknown. And that message never ages. Caring. Eustace, in contrast, embodies frustration, selfishness, and emotional neglect. He frequently mistreats Courage, dismisses danger, and prioritizes his own comfort. Yet even he becomes part of the strange emotional ecosystem of the show. The contrast between Muriel's warmth and Eustace's bitterness creates a household dynamic that feels oddly realistic, despite the surreal events outside. This blend of emotional realism and supernatural absurdity is another reason the show has aged so well. It does not treat fear as something separate from everyday life. Instead, it places fear directly inside domestic routine. Courage does not fight monsters in a distant fantasy world. He fights them in the kitchen, the living room, and the yard. The home, usually a symbol of safety, becomes a place of constant vulnerability. That inversion makes the show more psychologically resonant than many of its contemporaries. It suggests that fear is not something external that can be permanently escaped. It is something that can enter even the safest environments. And yet, within that instability, care and loyalty still exist. Another major factor in the show's lasting relevance is its willingness to engage with emotional depth that many children's programs avoided at the time. Episodes often explore loneliness, abandonment, anxiety, grief, and existential uncertainty. These themes are not always explicitly stated, but they are embedded in the narrative structure and Courage's reactions. One of the most significant revelations in the series is Courage's backstory. As a puppy, he was separated from his parents after they were sent into space by a cruel veterinarian. This moment reframes much of his personality. His anxiety is not random. It is rooted in loss. His fear of abandonment is not exaggerated for comedic effect. It is tied to a formative trauma. This retrospective understanding changes how the entire series is interpreted. Episodes that once seemed like simple monster-of-the-week stories become reflections of emotional insecurity and survival instinct. Courage's panic is no longer just a character trait, it becomes a coping mechanism shaped by early loss. This emotional layering is part of why adult viewers often find the show more meaningful upon rewatch. As children, viewers may focus on the monsters and humor. As adults, they notice the underlying emotional logic: fear, attachment, responsibility, and resilience. The writing also deserves attention for how it balances tone. The show constantly shifts between horror, comedy, and heartfelt emotion without fully committing to any single category. This tonal instability mirrors Courage's own psychological state. One moment is absurd, the next is terrifying, and the next is strangely tender. Rather than feeling disjointed, this blend creates a unique rhythm that feels intentional in retrospect. It also contributes to the show's rewatch value. Because the tone is layered, different ages and perspectives unlock different interpretations. A child might see a funny, scream-filled adventure. A teenager might see surreal horror. An adult might see emotional metaphor. The same episode can function on multiple levels without changing its content. Another reason for its longevity is how it treats intelligence and empathy as forms of strength. Courage rarely wins through physical force. Instead, he wins through problem-solving, emotional awareness, and persistence. He often studies situations, improvises solutions, and uses creativity to survive. Even when he fails, he tries again. This reinforces a broader message. Survival is not about being the strongest. It is about being adaptable and willing to continue despite discomfort. That message remains relevant across generations because it applies outside fiction as well as inside it. Modern audiences also view the series through the lens of nostalgia and internet culture. Clips, quotes, and scenes circulate widely online, often detached from their original context. This digital resurfacing has helped preserve the show's relevance. However, what keeps people returning is not just nostalgia, it is recognition. The themes still resonate because fear, uncertainty, and resilience are universal experiences. Interestingly, the show also benefits from comparison to modern animation trends. Contemporary animated series often embrace serialized storytelling, complex character arcs, and psychological depth. Viewed in that context, Courage the Cowardly Dog feels surprisingly aligned with modern sensibilities despite being created decades earlier. It was exploring emotional storytelling in a format that many shows would only fully embrace years later. Even its imperfections contribute to its lasting appeal. The occasional inconsistencies in animation, the abrupt tonal shifts, and the exaggerated expressions all add to its dreamlike quality. Instead of aging poorly, these elements enhance its surreal identity. It feels less like a conventional cartoon and more like a collection of emotional nightmares and strange parables. Ultimately, the reason the show has aged so well is not because it was trying to be timeless. It was not designed as a philosophical statement or a carefully engineered classic. It was a creative experiment that combined fear, humor, and emotional truth in a way that felt unusual for its time. But within that experiment, it captured something enduring. Fear does not disappear. Courage is not the absence of fear. And ordinary individuals, whether human or animated dog, can still act despite it. That idea remains just as relevant now as it was in 1999. And that is why the series continues to resonate, not because it avoided fear, but because it understood it.